gods gave me two gifts in 2016. One was Batman Superman, and the other was a Godzilla movie directed by Hideaki Anno, the director of every manic-depressive nerd's favorite mid-90s mecha anime series, Shin Evangelion. I was going to do a whole thing about Evangelion before we got here, but Shin Godzilla just came out on Blu-ray, and really, who has the time? Suffice to say, from the moment I saw Ava's first episode, and the obvious debt it owed to classic Toho monster movies, I dreamed of seeing Anno take a crack at Godzilla. Let that be a lesson to you, kids. Dreams actually can come true. Shin Godzilla turned out to be exactly the kind of Godzilla movie I'd expect Anno to direct. And that is both a source of eternal gratitude and a somewhat troubling sign. Anno's habit of falling into depressive episodes after he finishes a project is well documented by this point, and making 3 of the highest grossing movies in Japanese history, back to back no less, hasn't helped this tendency at all. And so it was that after he finished Evangelion 3.0, you can not redo, Anno's friend and fellow director, Shinji Higuchi, came to him with glad tidings. Godzilla's corporate masters at Toho had asked Higuchi to ask Anno to direct the next Godzilla movie. And everyone who knew him probably hoped that would snap Anno out of his not working on anything right now funk. But according to the man himself, Anno took a long time to contemplate the winning lottery ticket fate had all but slapped into his hand. So long that Higuchi eventually told him, and here I'm paraphrasing, but not really by that much, "Dude, it's fucking Toho, and they're fucking asking you to make the next fucking Godzilla movie. G-fans all over the world dream of this chance on a nightly basis, and they'll never forgive you for looking this gift horse in the mouth. Do it! I'll help you with the special effects and everything, but just do it! Yes, you can!" So they did, and the result is a Godzilla movie made specifically for me. As an inveterate fanboy, I already know my analysis is going to be annoyingly Anno-centric. But I should note right here at the top that Higuchi's no slouch either, no matter what Attack on Titan fans might say about him now. I thought I first saw Higuchi's work in the late 90s Gamera trilogy, and 2001's Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. But it turns out we go all the way back to the original Evangelion series, and I just never read the credits closely enough to realize it. I knew I'd love this movie the moment it opened up with the original Toho logo, and the same booming footstep noises that opened the first Godzilla movie all the way back in 1954. Believe it or not, this is the first full-on, no-frills reboot in Godzilla's 60-plus year history. If, of course, you ignore 1998's Roland Emmerich movie and 2014's Gareth Edwards movie, as most are wont to do. Previous Japanese reboots of the franchise have always rushed to assure us that the original film, the one movie that G-fans the world over can still agree on, remains in continuity. But this movie wipes the slate clean and asks, what if Godzilla rose from the depths now, in the 20-teens? Well, the first giant monster he'd fight would be, by necessity, the modern Japanese government, where real heroes debut in gray, featureless hallways, having good old-fashioned Aaron Sorkin-approved walk-and-talks with their aides. Such is our introduction to Rando Higuchi, Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary for the Prime Minister of Japan. Which means, for those of you who don't live in parliamentary democracies, that he's the government's designated middle manager, subject to all the shit rolling downhill from all the big names, and all the bile rising up from the rank and file. His job seems to consist largely of sitting in the back of meeting rooms and being ignored whenever he brings anything up. Like his concern that the flooding of a traffic tunnel under Tokyo Bay might be due to, say for example, a giant monster, rather than an earthquake or a new volcano. Initially, I feared centering the human action of this film in various conference rooms would alienate pretty much anyone who isn't me, but especially my fellow American G-fans. Those who don't ignore the human plots of these films outright are well trained by years of watching the major arcana of the giant monster movie stock character tarot deck go through long since standardized motions. all those characters are present and accounted for here, but they're also supplemented by another cast from what I like to call the Hideaki Anno Repertory Company. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, but if you show me an idealistic young protagonist getting told not to talk out of turn by a mentor figure in square glasses, my brain is gonna go, Houston, we have our Shinji. He's not manic-depressive enough to make the comparison obvious, but he still shamelessly trades on his father's political connections whenever the opportunity comes up. And since he's right about the whole giant monster thing, he not only gets to survive to the end, he gets kinda, sorta, rewarded, maybe? And Higuchi's just the start of this parade. Show me a slightly older woman with a sweet jacket who says things like, the use of weapons requires careful examination of options. And my brain's gonna go, oh, hi, Masato. Defense Ministry's a pretty big step up from Colonel. Congrats on the promo. Show me a no-nonsense, taciturn, low-ranking professional woman who's nevertheless right about everything, all the time, and only reveals an emotion at the very end. Oh, hi, Ray. Missed the red eyes, but I gotta admit, you look much more human without them. Show me a foreign beauty with 3 names and the highest of high ambitions, who speaks perfect Japanese and a heavily accented version of her supposedly native language. Oh, hi, Asuka. Recognized you right away. And I like her relationship with our Shinji much better here than I have at any other point in the past. Here, for once, they bring out the best in each other instead of the worst. Probably has something to do with them both being grown-ass political operators instead of traumatized children. The fact she comes looking for a biologist named Goru Maki is the cherry on top of this stunning and unexpected fan service cake. Maki was the name of the scientist in what my fellow Americans know of as Godzilla 1985. It was just called Godzilla when it came out in Japan in 1984, and calling it Godzilla 1984 would have probably been a better marketing ploy, now that I think about it, but that's the past. Fuck it. 1985 was the first Godzilla movie 5-year-old me managed to find in the back of his closest video store. In that film, Maki was the scientist who came up with one of the few ways to stop Godzilla that's actually worked. Granted, only until the next film, but still. In this film, Maki's the scientist who discovers Godzilla snacking on nuclear waste at the bottom of Tokyo Bay. Maki even names him, right before sailing his boat out to Godzilla's hiding spot and taking a header over the side, presumably in despair over the radiation-induced death of his wife, whom we never see. Ah well, at least he left all of his research behind. Can Higuchi and the team of nerds he hastily assembles in the bowels of the bureaucracy decipher it before Godzilla nukes Tokyo? Hell no! If they could, this movie wouldn't be nearly as good. The real question is, can they decipher Maki's research before the United States nukes Tokyo from orbit? Conventional weapons are still as useless as ever, as Shiro Honda be praised. And I still love how everyone assumes a nuke will just vaporize Godzilla instead of, say, making him stronger? Anyway, when you get right down to it, this movie starts off like a dark comedy. And I mean dark like the darkness between galaxies, where sentient starships wait to harvest us all like a well-tended crop. The Prime Minister and his cabinet switch meeting rooms 3 times. Because the briefing room is for briefings, and the cabinet room is for cabinet meetings, you see. Determining which agency Godzilla falls under takes precedence over determining what the hell to do about him, even as he tear asses through the streets. The first wave of scientists brought in are too concerned about their reputations to say anything about him at all. Experts at the Environmental Ministry conclude Godzilla couldn't possibly support his own weight on land, which of course he does, right after the PM says he won't at a televised press conference. Cell phone cameras and social media posts regularly scoop the combined information-gathering powers of one of the richest first-world countries in the world. The refrain from every level is, "This is unprecedented. We never drilled for this." Nothing in the manual applies here. Higuchi's initial attempts to take the initiative are stymied by quizzical expressions and questions of whom he's even talking to. Our hero only gets enough respect from up top to go form his own little study group after Godzilla's trampled a path through town. I could feel the joke land throughout the audience I saw this with at its one weekend-only showing at my local theater last year. The true horror dawned on them about halfway through when they realized their laughter was the laughter of recognition. I wonder how many of them thought of their own tedious office jobs, and about the various absurd protocols and procedures that rule over their lives. How many of them were thinking about Katrina, or Sandy, or Matthew, and what might have happened had a nuclear power plant been in any of their paths. And oh yeah, now I have to mention Harvey, and the disgusting chemical stew that it's probably unleashed upon us all. Can you tell I wrote and recorded most of this before that happened? I probably think about that too much, but then again, I've been watching Godzilla movies since I was 5, so... I watched from afar with dawning horror as the Fukushima disaster spun completely out of control. The fallout from that fucker is still literally washing up on my shores. And I'd be amazed at how quickly the rest of the world forgot about it if I had any faith in anyone's historical memory. And I've gotten used to being ruled over by stupid people who spew out constant streams of bullshit. There is no escape, not even in the film critic game. The true bad guy is big government, say the spoiled children over at Forbes, because of course they do. And don't I just love it whenever my fellow film critic Americans are so horribly myopic. Thank God for Japanese critics, who schooled me on various allusions to Fukushima I missed by not being there on the ground. The image of officials in blue emergency jumpsuits touring scenes of devastation is as loaded for this generation as the image of American and Russian diplomats arguing over who gets to nuke Tokyo first was for mine. Yes, modern Japanese government bureaucracy is the other giant monster Godzilla fights in this film. But like any good protagonist, it goes through its own defined character arc. As in so much of Anno's work, the true heroes are those who can expedite on the fly. In the movie's own words, they're a crack team of lone wolves, nerds, troublemakers, outcasts, academic heretics, and general pains in the bureaucracy. Not the type of power fantasy that usually gets labeled a power fantasy in my circles, but that's because over here, power fantasy is usually either a description of superhero movies or a slur against them. But make no mistake, boys and girls, for a certain type of nerd, this is as much of a power fantasy as any instance of super strength or super inherited wealth. It's the fantasy that a younger generation will rise up and overcome apocalyptic challenges that the older generations left us all to face by working together for the greater good of sheer human survival. Because on the other side of every dark comedy, there's a horror movie. Stare into its hollow, howling, insane eyes and face the horror. In this case, it's a very holistic breed of horror movie. Obviously, there's the genre standard horror of a giant monster causing mass casualties through the simple act of walking through a city as dense and brittle as Tokyo. And because this Godzilla mutates over the course of his film, we also have a lot more body horror than is average for this franchise. In the beginning, he looks like a cave-dwelling salamander. Once he hits land, he mutates into something like a dinosaur with fourth-degree burns. Kind of a Cretaceous-era Darkman. Jurassic Dark? Even his final form seems less like a tower of scales and more like a mass of hardened lava. The kind that makes sure the next eruption will be 10 times worse. Which of course it is. And the way his jaw unhinges like a snake. Looks extremely painful. And that's a good thing. Hovering above all that, though, is a species of horror movie I see so rarely I had to think up a cute new name for it, like the American I am. Sociological horror. The horror you might feel at the dawning realization that your entire society is ruled over by a calcified gerontocracy with its head firmly lodged up its ass. More obsessed with status and resume bullet points than with anything happening outside its conference room walls. Including the nuclear-armed superpower with no qualms about vaporizing your capital city from the comfort of their own on the literal other side of the world. Post-war Japan is a tributary state, and as Higuchi rightly points out, post-war is the kind of time period that extends indefinitely. It's horror at the idea that nothing, not even a nigh invulnerable fire-breathing monster from the sea, will ever shake the old men and the careerist shitheads out of their ladder-climbing ways, and that the rest of us will be stuck working under or around them for the rest of our horrible lives. It'd be nice if Godzilla could just casually vaporize them all in one nuclear laser blast, but he's never really been known for his precision, and we, his fans, would be sorely unhappy without a gratuitous amount of property damage. Despite that, though, I'd have to be made of stone not to be affected by shots of Tokyo's urban core transformed into a lidless orange eye. That such things still manage to penetrate my chitinous heart is a testament to our director's skills. There are few giant monster movie directors more qualified to wring pathos out of burning cities than Anno and Higuchi. The 90s Gamera trilogy managed that same trick, especially Gamera 3. And it's nice to see the 2 decades since then have not dulled Higuchi's superpowers in the slightest. About the only real criticism I can mount has to do with the relative flatness of these human characters. Much as I like to see the Hideaki Anno repertory company put on a Godzilla movie, I recognize when one of my favorite writer-directors is working on autopilot. The movie's big answer to living in a stifling, fossilized hierarchy is, or at least seems to be, work yourself all day and all night to the point where you forget to shower and never see your actual home ever again. Which is not a good answer by any stretch of the imagination. Works in this case because they're dealing with Godzilla, and you'd want people to be working that problem 24/7. But as a general rule... Also, this movie has an unbearably naive view of the United States, buying into the pious American fiction that we're some kind of meritocracy over here. oh, my sweet summer children. Instead of the giant rolling storm of fraud, lies, bullshit, branding, and retroactively legalized theft that we really are. But this isn't really about Rando Higuchi or any of the other human members of the cast. Certainly not in the same way that, say, the last Godzilla movie with Shinji Higuchi's name on it was about a reporter trying to repair her relationship with her admiral dad. If this movie's about anyone, it's, surprisingly, about Godzilla, which is great because this is literally a new Godzilla for a new age. And it's nice to see him become more than a supporting character, as he has in so many of his other films. Looking at you, Edwards. Don't run. I see you. Speaking of which, the last shot of this film, a slow pan up to the tip of Godzilla's tail, where several humanoid dorsal-finned creatures appear to be frozen in the act of tearing themselves free of his flesh, suggests several interesting interpretations. Yeah, he could just be eating people off screen. His mere presence could be mutating them into all kinds of funky things. Or, here's my theory, all the action in this film starts with the Coast Guard finding Goro Maki's boat floating in the bay. It's the first thing we see. Might just call it the inciting incident. So we know it's important. Yes, it's important because it supplies our heroes with the pseudo-scientific technobabble they'll need to come up with a working Godzilla countermeasure. But it also suggests that this Godzilla is quite content to chill at the bottom of the bay with all that illegally dumped toxic waste. Until a scientist with a serious hate-on for the nuclear industry, and all who aid, abet, and profit from it, took the Spalding Gray Express out of this mortal coil into his next life. Only after that did Godzilla rise from the depths and start mutating into a land animal. All of which makes me think there's a bit more human in this Godzilla's woodpile than in any of his previous incarnations. And this wouldn't be the first time he's become the vengeful avatar of the unjustly deceased in a movie half directed by Shinji Higuchi. I don't know. It's just a theory. A Godzilla theory. No. Sorry. Never doing that again. No. The fact, at least in my opinion, is Shin Godzilla's the Godzilla movie I wanted 2, 5, hell, 10 years ago. A remake that's worth every dollar spent making it and every dollar you might spend watching it. My fellow G-fans have already probably seen it multiple times. But if you have any interest at all in what giant monster cinema can be at its absolute best, we'll gladly welcome you to the party.